Hello everyone, this is Gihan Pereira and welcome to this online presentation where we've got in the next hour together, I'm going to help you get 2023 off to a great start. So I've called this Kickstart 2023 and we're doing this in early November 2022. But if you're watching the recording later and it's we're already into 2023, the ideas that I'm going to share here are just as applicable regardless of where you are. It's just like we seem to have this idea that every year is a new start, a fresh start, and in some ways it's useful to have that little marker in place. So given that we're all looking ahead to 2023, this is an opportunity for us to think about what are we going to do differently. And for us, we've had almost 3 years now of this global pandemic, and many people are feeling that now's the time that we're relieved that we're over the worst of it, and we're now living in this post-COVID, or at least living with COVID world, and really looking forward to what the new year will bring for us. So I want to share some really practical things that you can do to get ready for 2023 and not wait until 2023 to be ready for it. So for people who don't know me, and I'm just looking at the list here, I know a lot of people here do know me, and we've engaged before. But if you don't know me, my name's Gihan Pereira. You can find out all about me at gihanpereira.com, and I won't tell you much more about myself. You learn a little bit more as we go. These are some of the clients I've worked with over the years. For the last 10 years, I've been doing conference speaking, and for the last 25 years, working with leaders and their teams, helping them be fit for the future. So today I want to share some ideas about being ready for this short-term future. I'm discovering now that many more people, many more leaders are interested, not just in the technology that's coming up in the future, not just the cool gadgets, but also how do we lead in this time of great uncertainty and this future, which we don't really know what's around the corner, let alone what's way over the horizon. So my rules of engagement for all my presentations, and especially today, the 3 rules I've got. First of all, I want to give you things to think about. So this is an opportunity for you to think a little bit bigger than you would in your everyday operations. So take this opportunity now. It's better if you think big now, and if you have to walk it back a little bit when life gets in the way, that's better than trying to do it the other way around. And the second thing I always say is be a bit playful in this session. So there'll be an opportunity for you to interact, opportunities for you to interact. And especially in this session, I want to give you the chance to work in the session. So I am presenting some things, but it's not mostly about me presenting. It's about you doing some work in this session, because I think the alternative is that I do a presentation and at the end of it, you think that was great, but you never get the time to put things into action. So this is really going to be a very action-oriented session. So I'm going to give you some things that you can take away and put into place straight away. In fact, I'm going to get you to work on things that you can put into place straight away. So in terms of activities, we will break out into small groups later, and I'll explain why we do that. Also, there'll be an activity where I'll ask you to have some paper and pen. You only need 1 sheet of paper, and I'm going to ask you to work with that. I often say you can also use finger and iPad if you want to, and that works if you're taking notes, but for this activity, you're going to rip up the paper. So it probably doesn't work as well if you've got an iPad. So just have 1 sheet of paper, and towards the end of the session, so there'll be plenty of time for you to grab it, have a piece of paper and a pen to work through this activity that we're working through. Also, at the end of this, or at any time actually, so I work with a lot of leaders in this area around leading in uncertainty and being a future-ready leader. If at the end of this session, I'll invite you, if you're interested in having a chat with me about how we could possibly work together, then let's set up a time that we can have a quick discovery call where you can find out a bit more about what I do and decide whether it's a good fit for you, and I can help guide you in what are the best ways that we can work together. And if you want to do that, you can scan the QR code here and it'll take you to my calendar. If you want to have a conversation with me, or maybe you're not the right person, but somebody else in your team might be. If you want them to have a conversation with me, you can just schedule that in my calendar. So, and I'll have this QR code up at various times, and also at the end. At the end, I'll give you the way to do that. I've also got a handout for you, but you don't need the handout right from the start. So partway through, where it becomes relevant, I'll pop that link into the chat room so that you can download the handout as well. Okay, so here's what we do. We have got Christmas coming up. And I'm not saying this for religious reasons. It's because here in Australia and in some other parts of the world, things shut down around Christmas time. Certainly business and professional things shut down, and we have a little bit of a holiday. And we've got about 6 weeks to go before Christmas. So from now until that time that we shut the week of Christmas, we've got about 6 weeks. And the timing's perfect, because I reckon when we're working on something like this, like getting ready, a 6-week lead time is ideal. So if you're thinking about 2023, now's not the time to say, oh, let's wind down and get ready and for Christmas and then start again in January. Now's the time to be ready for 2023. So ideally, I'm going to suggest to you that the things that come out of today's session, that you use them in the next 6 weeks to be ready to really start 2023 with a bang. Now, you might already have holidays planned and you may have other commitments, and that's okay. If that's the case, you might need to tailor that timeline slightly, but now's the perfect time. 6 weeks to do a little mini project in the next 6 weeks is ideal as we're thinking about the year ahead. Okay, so that's my challenge for you, and that's my invitation for you to take these ideas and put them into place in the next 6 weeks. All right, so let's get into this. So I reckon that what we're looking for is clarity for the year ahead. It's nice to think that what we're offering is, for us as leaders, offering our teams, is certainty. And some people want certainty, but of course we know now that certainty is not possible. But what we can do is go into 2023 with more clarity and more confidence, knowing that things are going to change still. Okay, and even though we've had, for many people, it's the biggest disruption we've ever had in our lives with the global pandemic, and it's affected us, all of us, individually. So there's been more uncertainty than ever before, and there is more uncertainty to come, but at least we can have more clarity and confidence as we go into 2023. And there are 3 parts to this. So clarity is about 3 processes, and I'm going to give you some really practical things in each one of them. It's not as in-depth as if I was doing a leadership program for your people, or running a 1-day workshop, or even a 45-minute keynote presentation, but I want to give you little bits. Sorry, it's not as broad as that, but I want to give you some really specific things that you can do. Rather than giving you a really superficial high-level thing, I'm going to give you some really specific things that you can do. So broadly, the 3 things are this. So first of all, you need to understand reality and accept reality. And so this is what is. The next bit is look at what could be. So look at possibilities. And the third thing is that, of course, you can't do everything that's possible. So what you have to do is prioritize. And if you're looking to create clarity for the future, do these 3 things. Accept reality, look for possibility, and then set priorities. And I'm going to give you some really practical, tangible things you can do in each of these areas. Okay, so let's start the first one. Let's get real. Let's get real. Let's look at reality. And, we know that our reality has been shaken up in the last 3 years. And the reality moving forward is going to be very different from what we may have imagined pre-COVID. So I often say the future isn't what it used to be, because now we can see that what's coming up in the future, we don't exactly know what it's going to look like, but we know it's going to be very, very different from what we were expecting at the end of 2019, looking ahead to 2020. Okay, so let's look at how we get real. And that's really 3 areas. So one is about you. So what's your reality? The second thing is what's real about what's around you. So this could be your team, it could be your customers, it could be other people in your business, your organization. And of course, from a personal level, it's also your family and your community. And then what's the world going to look like? So these are what are the external things that are going to have an impact on you and the people who are in your inner circles. All right, so let's start with you first. So I'm interested. Yeah, so it's interested. I can see unmotivated there, and I've seen both motivated and unmotivated. I think if you look at these, just look at the variety of things that we can see in this list here. So tired and overwhelmed. Obviously, the bigger words are the ones that are coming up more commonly. So tired seems to be at the biggest. Tired, overwhelmed, burnt out. I'm hearing burnout a lot from a lot of the leaders I'm speaking to, and I've spoken to a lot in the last few weeks. Yeah, wobbly. That's interesting, right? Yeah, and you can see the range. You can see the range from some people who are feeling tired and exhausted, and then to maybe unmotivated and apprehensive about the year ahead, to some feeling excited and energized about the year ahead. So yeah, range of emotions, and of course, none of them are wrong. So if you go to the next step out, what I'd like you to do, and I'm not going to ask you to share this one, but please write it down for yourself, or please be aware of it because you're going to use this later, is what is your biggest challenge right now? In fact, for some of the people who registered for this early, I sent out an email saying, can you please let me know what your biggest challenge is? And thank you for the people who did respond to that, because again, it was really interesting to see the range of responses, some which were really common and some which were different. So I got unmotivated as one of the responses. We're finding hard to be motivated and get distracted with things because there's so many things happening around me. Burnout, there was definitely something that came out as well. So just for yourself, make a note of what you think your biggest challenge is, not for you personally, mentally, but particularly in your professional role. What's your biggest challenge? Is it burnout? Is it finding staff? Is it staff shortages at the moment? Is it people leaving? Is it that you don't exactly know what's coming up next year, so it's hard to plan? So these are the sort of things that I've been hearing people say when I've been talking to them about what's going on for you and what are your challenges. Okay, so I'm just going to stop for about 15 seconds while you have a little bit of thinking and write down what your biggest challenge is for yourself. And we'll use this later. Right, so the other thing that we now look at is, as I said, when you look at reality, you look at yourself, you look at your world, which is this bit here, and then we look at the world. And often, many leaders don't take the time to look at what's happening externally. Now we're a lot more aware that things that happen outside have an impact on us. But this is something that many leaders still, like, you're too busy, you're focused on what's right in front of you, and you should be looking into the future and at external pressures, but it's difficult to do that when you're so busy. So in fact, what I do with leaders often is I run a program around scenario planning, and we talk about exactly this. And we use this process called PESTLE analysis to look at external pressures in your future. And I'm going to do a little mini cut down version of that here, so to help you understand what some of those external pressures are. And PESTLE is just it's just an acronym, and there's nothing magic about the word. It's just the letters PESTLE, and as you can see, it's just a way of categorizing things that might be happening externally. So what political things might be happening in the short, medium, and long term that could affect you, what environmental things, what social things, what technology, what laws and regulations under legal, and what economic things are happening, again, short term, medium term, long term, that could have an impact on our future. Okay, now if I do this scenario planning process, which includes PESTLE, with the group, we spend quite a lot of time on this so that we can identify the sort of external things that could be affecting us. Today, we're not going to do the whole process in depth, but we've got enough people here that if we do, like, if I ask you to share in the chat what some of those things are, I think we'll get a reasonable range. So let me give you some examples of the sort of things that you might think about. So this is just a couple of slides, and I've chosen political and social. I was working with a group out here in regional Australia, regional Western Australia, and we're looking at that with their board of their organization to look at external pressures on their organization. So these are some of the things that we came up with. And this was just some examples in the political sphere, and there's and we did the same for all of them, but you can look at see some of these. So obviously trade deals, billionaires calling the shots, Australia becoming a republic, Busselton Airport. This is something that may be most relevant for people in Western Australia if it becomes international, and we have people flying in from Asia straight into the Margaret River wine region and to regional Australia. What's that going to mean for us? We've seen things like food insecurity, global war, millennials having more voting power, and we've seen that with the latest census, that millennials are now the biggest generation in Australia. Global trade and so on. Okay, so those are some of the sort of things that this group identified. And what I do when I do a pestle analysis with people is I bring in research from various places. So some of this is my research and some of it is what the group identified. Some more examples. This one's in social. So, we're going to have the metaverse, or is it all a bunch of hype? Hybrid work, social trust. What are some of the others? Health spending, online shopping. So socials around people. Food, plant-based meat, and diversity and inclusion. Is that going to grow, or are those is it going to fade away? Okay, so those are just some of the examples. So if I ask you, if you're looking ahead to 2023, which are the sort of things that might be affecting you in your organization, in your business, and particularly like in your leadership role? Okay, so let's do this. I'll ask you to share in the chat any of those things. So under political, environmental, social, technological, legal, economic, and don't worry too much about which category they fit into. Just type in the chat which of those things are going to affect you, and we'll get a range of them. So we'll have a couple of minutes doing this little exercise. So legislation changes, yeah, absolutely, and social, Gen Z in the workplace, yep, and that's soon going to be the biggest generation. Currently the millennials are Gen Ys are, but Gen Zs are going to be the biggest. Working from home, new software, consumer confidence, economic downturn, increase in migration, skill shortages, crypto, changing staff expectations. Yep, absolutely. VR, which is very closely related to the metaverse, politicians not delivering on their promises or on their policies, aging population, inflation. I'm happy to keep going. This is great. This is really good. So people leaving teaching to more lucrative areas. Yeah, I know who that came from. Yeah, burnout in healthcare, flexible work, yeah, digital literacy, energy crisis across the world, staff shortages, disinformative influences. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. This idea of fake news, worsening climate change impacts, workplace is less competent as needs change, leadership burnout, skill shortage, circular economy. So, if you're looking at the chat, or if you're listening to what I'm saying, you can see there's a range, and some of them might have a positive impact. Some of them might have a negative impact. But the idea of the pestle analysis is that you do it without judgment, because any one of those things, like staff shortages, seems like a problem. It seems like a risk that you have to face. But in some cases, it could be an opportunity, and some people will turn that into an opportunity. Online education, next round of COVID, yeah, we're already starting the next wave. Losing authority as we age, yeah, so that idea that we're flattening hierarchies, supply chain disruptions, budget constraints, interest rates, yeah, ageism. Yeah, and ageism works across in both directions, right, Georgina? What else do we have? Victorian election. Yeah, so there's some very, very short-term things. Okay, good. Now, this is actually a really useful exercise for you to do with your team as well, because there are going to be from the diversity in your team, different people will see different influences. Now, if we, like, again, when I run this program with leaders and their teams, what we then do is we take everything that comes up and we narrow it down to short-term, medium-term, long-term. And what I recommend that you do, if you're doing this with your team, is to do it this way. Do the pestle first so that you get people thinking in these 6 categories. Don't worry too much about where things fit. Sometimes things under political and economic and legal, they're kind of intermixed, but it doesn't really matter where they go. It's just to get you thinking in 6 different categories. And then identify as best as you can which of them you think are going to be medium-term impacts. And medium-term, it varies depending on organization and industry, but I would think aim for between 2 to 5 years, because short-term stuff, most leaders, if they're doing their job well, are already thinking about them. So they're already in your plans, and that's okay. The long-term things, most of them you can safely ignore for the moment, but the medium-term ones are the ones that are worth looking at, that are kind of over the horizon and could have an impact sooner rather than later. Okay, so that's how you do pestle analysis. I hope that even just doing that thinking now will get you thinking about some of those things that will have an impact for you right in the next, the start of 2023, in the next few months. Okay, so thank you for doing that. And I wanted to give you a feel for it, a flavor for it, so you can then take that and do that in more detail later. Okay, but now let's move on to this second area. So we looked at reality. So reality is what's the world like now? What's my world like now? Let's now look at possibility. So I asked you earlier to write down what your biggest challenge is. In this little segment here, we're going to tap into the power of the crowd and your colleagues who are here around you to help you with that biggest challenge. And we're going to do it with a little exercise, which I call My First Job. Okay, so write down for yourself, not in the chat room, but for yourself, write down what your first job was, kind of your first paid job. And it may have been you weren't paid very much. Perhaps you were doing babysitting, or I think about my stepdaughter, Abby, before she finished high school. So she had done babysitting. She was a coach at a gym because she was really good at gymnastics. So she was doing some part-time coaching. She had worked in hospitality at Perth Stadium, Optus Stadium, when it first opened up. She'd worked at a checkout job in a little grocery down the road. So, that could be one of those, might be your first job. Okay, a couple of people are writing down, worked at KFC, lawn mowing, pharmacy assistant. Actually, just write them down in the chat, since a couple of people have shared already. Office boy. Short order cook. Market research analysis, market store, checkout work, waitress, cleaning cinemas, local library and video store, fruit picking, sandwich hand. Okay, let me tell you about mine. So mine hasn't come up in that list yet. So my first job was as a maths tutor. So this is when I was still at school, because I was really good at maths and I used to be quite nerdy, and you don't have to write anything in the chat about that, because I reckon half the room is going, I can't believe that, Gihan, really? And the other half's going, what do you mean used to be? But that was the thing, like I was really good at maths. And of course, other kids knew that. And so some other parents of other students said, can you help my child with their maths? And they used to pay me, not very much, but it was quite a lot of money for me as a school kid at the time. So in my first job as a maths tutor, I learned some things. And so what I'd like you to do is I'm going to tell you some of the things that I learned in my first job. And I'm going to ask you to write down for yourself. Don't share this in the chat room, but write down for yourself, what skills did you learn from your first job? Okay, let me give you some examples here. So one of the things that I learned was that not everybody thinks the same way. So I was really good at maths. So I was good at abstract thinking. I could follow processes and mathematical principles and so on. But other people really struggled with that. So I had to think of other ways that I could teach them to learn what they needed to learn. Another thing that I learned was some people are way behind. So there might have been a student who was in year 9 trying to do algebra, but he missed something about fractions in year 6. And just because of the way the system works, it kind of leaves that leaves them behind. And so then they were struggling with algebra, but really they were struggling with something that they hadn't picked up years and years earlier. So that was different. That was something I had to learn. I was good at abstract things, but I found that people understood, quite often people understood if I could relate it to something real. So even more recently, when I was helping my nephew, this is of course unpaid, I was helping my nephew with year 11 and 12 maths. He's crazy about cricket. He plays cricket really well. And so I was explaining to him, Riley, you know, when you're talking about sine and cos, if you're hitting a cover drive, you're hitting it out into where sine's positive, cos is positive. If you're hitting an on drive or pulling to mid wicket, then can't remember which way around it is, sine's negative, cos is positive, and so on. But by visualizing it for him, that made more sense to him. Similarly, if I could draw a picture and try and draw a picture of some mathematical problem that was just expressed in words and numbers, it was easier. And the other thing I learned was that different people have different goals. So as somebody who enjoyed maths and was good at it, I really wanted to learn. I really wanted to understand the principles behind it. For some of the people I was tutoring, it was just about, let me get pass this test and I'll never have to think about that again for the rest of my life. And I kind of thought that was interesting because that wasn't my way of thinking. But it is like, you know, you think about fitness. Some people are going, I want to be fit because I want to have a fit and healthy body. And some other people are thinking it's just about getting into the wedding dress. Okay, so different people have different goals and none of them is right or wrong. So write down for yourself at least three skills that you learned from your first job. And these are skills that, you know, they're transferable skills like the ones I've got here. So if you worked at KFC, it's not I learned how to heat up chicken. It's whatever skill that you learned, write it down. Okay, so let's do a little exercise here with the group. So what I'm going to do is think about, remember, your biggest challenge, the thing that we spoke about earlier, that you've written down what your biggest challenge is, and you've also written down at least three skills that you learned from your first job. So I'm going to now break us into small groups. There'll be groups of about 3. Some groups might only have 2, which means you have a tiny bit more time, but typically there'll be a group of 3. And what you do is you take it in turns. So the first person in the group says, my biggest challenge at the moment is this, and you state it. The other 2 people in the group, they jump in and they offer a suggestion, and they offer a suggestion based on something they learned in their first job. So I did this recently with I'm running a leadership coaching program. And so somebody in the group said, my biggest challenge is I've got a team member who she's fantastic at what she does, and she should be moving into more leadership stuff, but she doesn't want to let go of the stuff that she's doing, that she should be delegating to somebody else that she now hires. And so I said, okay, well, my suggestion in my very first job as a maths tutor, one of the things I learned was that different people have different goals. So can I suggest that you talk to this person, find out specifically what her goals are, because they might be quite different from what you think your goals are for her. Now, the person who gets that advice, your role is to write it down and say, thank you. Okay, don't say, oh yeah, I tried that once, or oh, you don't know that person, or you know, that's not going to work in our job, in our work. So don't push back against it. You can ask them to clarify what you mean by that, but apart from that, just say thank you. Okay, so if you're working in a group of 3, everyone's going to get 2 bits of advice, and then you switch around to the next person. All right, let's see how we go. So, all right, welcome back, everyone. Any feedback, any comments? So now I see that you said in your in the chat, we only got through 1 person, but I enjoyed that activity. And so what I usually ask for at this point is, did anyone get any useful insight for themselves? So if they were the person who shared their challenge, did somebody else in their group share something that was really interesting to them? So now, was yours in that category, that you got some value for yourself, or did you share for somebody else? Feel free to unmute if you want to, or if you're in, yeah, Sana, go ahead.
I was offering. I didn't get to share my challenge, unfortunately.
Yeah. So why did you find it useful, or why did you enjoy it?
Well, I just enjoyed the whole camaraderie, I guess, and between the 3 of us in that sense, and the different ideas that even the other person had, which applies to you as well, because you can use that as well in your own,
it is
even if
interesting, isn't
somebody
it?
else's challenge?
Yeah, sometimes it's nice to realize that you've actually got the skills to solve the problem yourself using some skills that you'd forgotten that you had. Tanya, you've got your microphone on. Is that because you want to speak?
I was in Sona's group and was the subject person who took up all the time. But the one thing for me was that it basically taught me that what I was doing was already what they suggested I should do. So that's almost like perhaps a pat on the back to think that I'm thinking similarly to others in the group. And I think that the suggestions reinforced, you're on the right tracks, keep doing what you're doing. I think that was what I got out of that as well. It was a very good sharing experience. I agree with Sona on that.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Tanya. Let's see. Gillian says it's good finding someone with a similar challenge. Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of the things that I often find is that because I speak to so many people from so many different industries and leaders across different industries, different businesses, and I hear a lot of the challenges, and many of them are similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. And it is nice for people to hear that I'm not alone. There are other people who are going through similar things at the moment. Kelly says, I had a lot of time about trying to prioritize, manage time. Yeah, and burnout. Yeah, exactly. Make time for self-care. Yeah, it's like that, the thing about put on your own oxygen mask first before helping other people. And I think in COVID, we've all recognized, there has been a need for that. And some people recognize the need to do that early, to look after themselves first, because otherwise it's difficult to care for other people. Okay. Yeah, Melissa says, I feel overwhelmed. Great to hear little tips to make it a bit better. In fact, the next segment of this session here is going to be very much around priorities and setting priorities. Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, let's do this next. Also, by the way, remember at the start, I said there is a handout, and the handout is a little bit of a self-assessment for yourself about being a future-ready leader. And it has some of those things in there around clarity, around empathy, around building trust. And it's a bit of an assessment for yourself to see where you are. So you can find out what your strengths are, so you can keep working in that area and find out what perhaps you need to grow in, what your weaknesses are. And so I've got that for you. And if you want to get it, I'll just paste the link in it's not the QR code at the moment. I'll paste the link in the chat room for the people who are here at this session. And if you're watching the recording, you'll see the link also attached to this. So download that. It's part of this, just got a little mini presentation booklet about the Future Ready Leaders program. And this is one of the pages in there, but it's useful for yourself to understand where you are and also to reflect on some of the things that you might want to do if you're thinking about building trust or empowering your team. Okay, so that handout's available for you to download, and please use that. It's not, you don't need to get it right away, but if you click the link, it should start automatically downloading for you now. That QR code, again, is the same one that I showed earlier. If you want to have a discovery call with me to talk about how we can either run this program that I'm doing now, this Kickstart program for your team, or the Future Ready Leaders program for your team. And again, if you download the handout, you'll get more information about that program. Okay, so let's go on to the third bit, which is around priority. So how do we, now that we know some of the things that are possible, how do we prioritize, given that we've all got limited time in our busy lives and our lives are becoming busier and busier? How do we prioritize? There's a lot I could cover here. And rather than trying to cover a lot in limited time, what I'm going to do is choose one activity that's really valuable in setting your priorities. And this is very much a personal activity for you. I don't mean for your personal life, but I mean this is for you. So when I work with leaders and teams, we talk about team priorities as well, and sometimes the organization's priorities, but this is very much about personal priorities. Okay, so this is a bit where you do need a bit of paper, but let's do it this way. Okay, so grab your bit of paper So just a sheet of paper, as I said, you only need one sheet of paper and a pen. And what I'd like you to do is rip the paper into 4. The way to do this is to bend it in 2, fold it in 2, fold it in 2 again. I said bend because I was thinking about if you're using an iPad here. But yep, fold it in 2, fold it in 2, and then tear. So you've got 4 equal bits of paper. All right, so I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Here are a few that I prepared earlier, which we'll use one of them. But yeah, you want to end up with 4 bits of paper here. And when you do that, what you're going to do with each of those 4, let me show you with one of them, is these are going to be 4 priorities for you. So they're like 4 projects, they may be 4 people, they may be 4 little initiatives that you want to do as you're looking ahead to 2023. And what I'd like you to do is write down on each bit of paper what that priority is, what the project is. By the way, this is all going to be done for yourself, so there won't be any more breakout rooms. I'll invite you to share some of the things as we go, but that's all optional. So write down whatever is important to you. But when you write it down, just write it down. If you imagine this as the top third of the paper. Okay, so it might be something professional in your role. So it might be hire some team member, because you need that because you're overwhelmed and you need to do something there. It might be that you've got a team member and you know that you need to promote so and so, and you write that down as a priority because you know that will make a big difference to them and to you and to the team. It might be something personal. It might be something that to do with your family, and it might be catching up with them and spending more time with your parents or even with your kids. So it might be something like that. Okay, so you're going to have 4 of them. And the reason you've got 4 of them is I want you to, once you've got the 4, to prioritize them. But first of all, write down 4. Okay, let me give you a few seconds to do that. So you're going to end up with 4 things here, which are priorities for you in the, if you like, in the short term, because we're still talking about things you're going to do in early 2023. So it's still relatively short term. So they're important things for you. If you're not quite sure what to write, ask yourself this question or these questions. So one is, what one thing could you do that would make a huge difference in every other part of your, let's say, business? And that's a good question to ask. So it might be that hiring somebody would be really great for you. So maybe like you're struggling to do something, I don't know, like you're struggling to update your own website if you run your own business, and you think if I hire a webmaster or I outsource that work, that would take so much of the burden off me. It might be that you need, and I'm trying to pick something that doesn't require hiring. It might be that you are overwhelmed because you're doing somebody else's work. So if you promote or empower somebody else or train them, then that's going to make a huge difference to you. Okay, so that might be one of the things that you write down on your 4 bits of paper. Okay, so I'm assuming you've got 4 now. So now, if you look at those 4, pick one of them. Pick one of them for the purpose of this activity. If you've written down 4 things, then I think all 4 of them are important for you. And I would invite you after this session to go and repeat this little exercise for the other 3 of them. But for now, we're going to use just one of the 4. So pick whichever one of those 4 is you think is going to be the most important for you or the most valuable for you to do in the next 3 months. Okay, so the next 3 months means the 6 weeks leading up to Christmas and the end of the year, and then the start of 2023. Okay, so pick which one's going to be the most valuable, the most important. You might have more than one. For example, you might have a professional one and a personal one. That's good. Just pick one of them for the purpose of the next 10 minutes and then do the other one after we finish. All right, so you've got your 1 now. I'm going to now suggest to you some activities that you can do to make those things happen. So let me pick one here. Let me pick a promote one. So you've decided that you're going to promote somebody. So let's give them a name because you know who they are in your team, Promote Way. And you decide that I'm going to promote this person. And in the next 6 weeks, I'm going to do some activities that are going to help them so that they're ready, they're promoted by the start of next year. Okay, so they're ready to go. So what I'm going to suggest that you do, so create these 3 columns here. And okay, I'm going to write these in big letters. Don't you write the big letters, but it's going to be AHA, A-H-A. Okay, you may want to write at the top here, action, habit, and as if. Okay, that's what the AHA is, action, habit, and as if. So just write the little words because I want you to just leave that space there for you to write your own things. Does anyone, before we get into the AHA, does anyone feel comfortable in the chat room if you want to share what your big idea was here or your big action here? Okay, so what is it there? So for me, just so you know, so one of the things I want to do is hire a business manager. Again, because I had somebody pre-COVID and she's moved on to another role now, so I'm looking for somebody else and I want to get somebody else. So that's mine. So mine would be hire a business manager. If anyone else wants to share this, feel free to in the chat. Just see some examples of what people are doing. A lot of the things are around people, so that might be something you want to do. Build the capacity of our middle leadership group to lead whole school priorities. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, great. Okay, so for that, you might just say build capacity for here, and you know what that means. Provide more support to a colleague. Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Okay, let me talk you through the EHA. A couple of people saying, okay, Alex saying, finish writing my ebook. Excellent. Tanya is a declutter. Okay, so we're not going to go through this massive goal setting process, which is all about, which would be something like, okay, what is it? Like, what's it mean to you? How is it going to change your life? You know, how will you know when you've done it? So like Tanya, like what does declutter mean? Does it mean just clearing one bookshelf? What does it mean? You know, we're not going to go through that. I think you've probably been through things like that in the past. And what I'm going to, and I'm not saying those are not useful. Absolutely, those things are useful. But today I'm going to give you some action steps and some things that you can do on a daily and a weekly basis to get that goal done. So as to make progress with some processes. Okay, so action, habit, and as if. So the first one is action. So a question for you is, what action will you take in the next week, and preferably before that, to get started on this process? Okay, so what action will you take in the next week, preferably before? So ideally, what action will you take today to get started on this process? Next to ideally is, what action will you take before the end of the week? And if you're watching the recording, we're doing this on a Thursday, so it gives you a day and a half to do this. But worst case scenario, what action will you take in the next week? And it could be actions. Okay, so what actions will you take quickly? The actions you're looking for that you want to take are things that are testing your idea and testing your plan. So for example, so if I can pick one here that was written like provide more support to a colleague, can I suggest that the person who said that, the action for you is that there are lots of actions you could take. One thing you could do, for example, is read books about how you can be more supportive, or read an article or do a Google search for some resources. Instead of that, a more direct action is go and talk to a colleague and say, what's your problem? Now, what are you struggling with? The idea is that try and get something that's out in the real world. So you get some feedback, okay, because that will be more useful to you than going off and learning all this stuff beforehand and then taking action around it. So for example, if you are a business owner and you're launching a new product, instead of building the product and going through a whole bunch of design work and implementation to create a product, ask your customers, like, would this product be useful to you? Even better, ask them, what do you really need now? So you want to get some action that's out in the real world. Yeah, like if you're writing an ebook, even in that case, it might be useful to say, hey, I'm going to send out a draft of it to my top 10 people in my network and say, look, this is a draft. Please keep it to yourself. I'd like to get some feedback. Okay, get it, like, this is action that's out in the world. It's useful for two reasons. One is Somebody said this earlier, that it's useful to know that I'm on the right track. That's useful, but it's also really useful to know if you're on the wrong track or whether you need to adjust your track. Okay, so that's action. Tanya, declutter. I reckon the action is just to declutter. You know, so just to start there, because it's probably not something that you need to check with anybody else. Okay, so write down action or actions that you can take quickly. They don't have to be big actions, by the way. So there's a Stanford professor called B.J. Fogg, and he's written this great book called Tiny Habits. And he says the way to get things done now is not to do these massive actions, but to do tiny actions. So the old way of doing it in the 1980s, the Anthony Robbins way, was to say, take massive action now, because then you get your brain thinking in this way, you give it a big shock and it starts thinking in a new way. B.J. Fogg says, no, don't do that. Do tiny little things. So he says, if you want to get into the habit of flossing your teeth, then after every meal, then start by flossing one tooth. Okay, just do that. And then maybe the next day you do 2 teeth and so on. So he talks about these tiny habits, he calls them, but I'm going to suggest tiny actions as well. So if you're going to talk to your customers, it doesn't mean that you convene a focus group with everyone. It's maybe have a conversation with 2 people and say, what do you want? Okay. Yeah, Tanya's saying, yeah, okay. So it's collective restructure, recruit, redesign. Yeah, excellent. To be outcome focused. Yeah. So again, find out which are the most important things by again asking people. It may be internally with your team, it may be externally with your customers or other stakeholders. Okay, and then moving on to habits. Okay, so how do you make this a habit? So Annie Gillard says that the way we live our days is the way we live our lives. So how do you create a habit around this? So what's something that you can do? And it may be a tiny habit that is something that you do regularly, ideally every day. So what can you do every day that's moving you towards this goal that you want to achieve? Okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that you know exactly how you're going to achieve the goal, but it's just taking action every day. So one of the things you might do is you might say, at the start of every day, I'm going to spend 15 minutes working on this goal. Or it might be, when I get back from lunch, before I start doing any other work, I'm going to work on this goal. Okay, so that might be where you're going to do these little activities. Okay, and the third bit is the as if, and this is saying, who would you role model? Who's the master of this? Who do you know who does this really well? And how can I act as if I was that person? Okay, so it's like putting on a costume or wearing a different hat or taking on another persona. So I did this with a group of students many years ago, helping them with their study skills. And I said, okay, you're coming up to the end of the year, you've got some big exams coming up. If you were to get some advice from some mentor or some advisor, who would that be? And you say, what would so-and-so do? And one of the students, when she did this activity, she said, I thought to myself, what would Harry Potter do? Okay, and she took some inspiration and insights from what Harry would do in this situation. Now, it's not that she wrote to J.K. Rowling and said, what would Harry Potter do? She just took it from her own imaginary idea of what would Harry Potter do. So it can be somebody completely fictional as well, but it could be, what would my mentor do? What would the best leader I've ever had do? What would some fictional character do? What would the best salesperson in the world do? So for me, one of the things I'm focusing on is doing more selling of my business and my new programs and so on. And it's actually selling. And I'm thinking, if I was hiring a salesperson to sell me, what would they do? And then I've got this habit of going, okay, I'm putting on this my hat of selling Gihan, as opposed to being Gihan, the presenter or the leadership program developer and deliverer or the leadership coach. It's me being the salesperson for that. Okay, so if you were as if, who's the as if that you would go to? Okay, it doesn't have to be a real person. It doesn't have to be that you're going to go and ask them. It's if you were that person, what would you do? What would you do? And what sort of activities would you do? Okay, Good. So we're pretty much at time. So the timing's perfect. So that's a little process here. So do this with each of your four priorities. Decide what the priority is, and then do the aha process. What action am I going to take now? Action or actions? How can I make this a habit in my day? And so that it gets done regardless of how busy I am with everything else. And then who do I know who would do this really well? And if I could wear their cloak, what would I do differently? All right, and just use that, especially the habits bit. If you can build this into a habit, habit trumps discipline every time. If you have to be disciplined to do this work, then it's very easy to find other priorities. But if it becomes a habit, like brushing your teeth, then it doesn't matter how busy you are, you know you're going to brush your teeth every day. Or it doesn't matter how much of a rush you're in, when you get into your car, you're going to put on your seatbelt. So these are habits. So see what you can do to build these as habits. Okay, Tanya says, thank you. And yep, we're at time, so I'm going to finish off here. So we talked about these three things, about reality, possibility, and priority. As I said, and as I've said through this session, if you want to have a chat with me and have a discovery call about how we can work together, either on this particular thing, which is my Channeling Chaos program, or if you want to talk about future ready leaders for yourself or your other leaders in your team or for your team, then have a chat with me. AskGihan.com will also take you to the same place where you can book a discovery call. My last message is, I see lots of thank yous coming in, so thank you for that. My last message, as I often say, is don't wait for things to be perfect. Start before you're ready. And especially now, I think we've got this perfect time before everybody's, well, in Australia, before people stop for their Christmas break, we've got this perfect time for 6 weeks now to set yourself up for a great 2023. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. I'll see you in the future. Bye for now.